Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Nima, for this introduction. It was my last 26 years of experience in few sentences. And this is a good opportunity example that whatever we do in nanoscience and advanced materials, there will be different generations and the young people have new ideas. So this is actually my main message of today. I will not go into details of some of the science I've been doing over the years, but I will give a reflection, an overview, and hopefully also an inspiration to move on to actually implement the technologies to usefulness for the society. And like we discussed now in the before this session started, there are many challenges in the world. COVID-19 is only one of them, but we have the climate, energy needs, and so on. So those are our big motivations. So I will now share a presentation. So do you see my presentation now? Yes, great. So now the technology works. Now let's see if I can also work. So a background, I am a researcher since 1995. And what I have been doing is advanced materials growth of silicon carbide and graphene on silicon carbide. And then I started to become interested how to make usefulness of the research findings. So over the years now, my career has shifted towards my own activity in Alminica, which is an SME in R&D. And there I have a center for research utilization. So it's a very small center, but it's focused on sharing experiences and learnings for how to make more usefulness from research. And this can only happen by exchange because there's no unique recipe. And now, when we have the more goals, for example, Agenda 2030 goals, which are coming more and more as a request when we apply for fundings and so on, then we need to consider the innovation aspect. Not only mention it, but also there should be some type of strategic thinking or plan. And actually, for me, and this is a new approach that in the academic career, it is possible to have entrepreneurial research as a career. And this is especially for the young people because now it's more and more challenging to find funding for research projects. But if we have a thinking how this can be applied to the society, then it becomes additional things which are useful and it can be a part of a career. So that's why the young people and also the youth who are very, very young, they should be inspired by the things we are doing. And actually, just a few days ago, I was reading an article or a post on LinkedIn, which is a good professional network to pick up ideas and have exchange, is that if we go back a number of years to the 20-year-old me or you or when you were in this age, what would be the general recommendation? So it was actually a post on Twitter. And on Twitter, you have a lot of comments. So it became a lot of advices and summary of what would you give as an advice. And basically, the message here is that start with things, don't plan forever, but get going because things will anyway change. And this is also part of my career. And if we look into the challenges here, what we are doing in nanoscience, Dr. Israel gave a very nice overview of things in the nano. And immediately, what happens is that all these small things, they have many, many, many applications and possibilities, and we don't know exactly how to use them yet. But if we have the science about it, there's a lot of things which can be done. So the topic can be very, very broad, and activities can be very broad. So this is a huge opportunity as well as challenge. And if we are thinking of materials, this is the silicon wafer. On the left side, you have the fabrication of the material in the 1960. So then the diameter was 23 millimeter. And over the years, the diameter of this material has increased. But you see in this timeline that it is almost 40 years before coming to 300 millimeter wafer. And as you know, silicon is used in the electronics and all the integrated processors and circuits and processors and so on. Silicon is the base material which revolutionized many things which we can have. But the time span is still many years. So this is something we should have in mind when we plan our activities. And my background is silicon carbide growth. And there, the fundamental process is that you have a source with silicon and carbon atoms in powder form. This is the general principle. And then when you heat up, you have a silicon and carbon bearing species. And they are transported to the growing surface, and then you grow silicon carbide. So it is grown from the vapor phase, not like the silicon, which is grown from its liquid phase. So this became my research topic in 1990s, how to grow material and explore that one. And the overall motivation is similar, how to have wafers from the material so the epitaxy and devices can be developed. And in the beginning, in the 1990s, it was a lot of challenges related to the fundamental understanding of the material. There was some understanding, but more needed to be done, especially when we come to the reproducibility of findings. And the reproducibility is needed for applications. And in my case, one of the processes which we explored was a modified version of the basic principle. So instead of long distance, we had a short distance between source and substrate. And also we grew at lower temperature and in vacuum and so on. So it became an epitaxial method. And at this time, it was needed to have thick layers for power devices. So that was the motivation in the 1990s. And we managed to have thick layers on the silicon carbide wafers. At that time, they had nice quality, smooth surfaces, and so on. But they were not pure enough. So the highlight of my thesis was that to develop a method which was not useful for its intended purpose at that time. So this was 1999. I established a lot of fundamental knowledge and know-how and skills in the growth and so on. And this was some type of result, but it was not the method which we started to have hope for from the beginning. And then a few years later, 2006, 2007, came Professor Satoshi Kamiyama, who had an idea to use silicon carbide as light-emitting material. So when you have donors and acceptors, you can actually have recombination from the material of the silicon carbide. And in that case, he needed thick layers. So then I came into contact with him, and we started collaboration because I had this method for thick layers, which was not useful for the power devices, but now it found its purpose for the light emission purposes. So a new type of white LED. And the general principle is that you have donors and acceptors. They can go to different levels, which means that the light which comes out has a broader range. And if we do this in two layers with slightly different doping, they actually cover the visible region using the silicon carbide. So altogether, it becomes pure white light. So from the growth point of view and the physics, there were many new things here. So it became a fantastic opportunity to explore research and later on technology from this new area, which was not planned from the beginning because it was an idea from international researcher in Japan. And just to elaborate a little bit on the challenges there, then we need to have this doping. It should be a certain level so the emission is efficient. We cannot have too high doping because they have defects, and if too low doping, it will not be enough light created. And also the balance of donors and acceptors is a challenge. So this is a those challenge in this donor acceptor paralluminescence. So it's a different type of luminescence from the general one, which is available in the PN junctions for the blue LED. And if we look at the challenges, there are similarities. When you increase the excitation, the IQE drops down, like the group effect in the blue LED, which is still a challenge, even though you have white LEDs on the market. So the science will always be there, even if materials and technologies are mature enough. And it works. We have lab LEDs, which show that lights come out at room temperature. It's not very strong for being applied to the general lighting, but there is light coming out from the material. So there are demonstrators that this actually works to some extent. And as many things, we need to understand more of the details and then do the engineering type of activity to have the technology out. And the nice thing here is that we started collaboration. So I initiated the European project, or in the Nordic. We had collaboration with Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. So we found some funding, and there I got in contact with Hayano from Denmark Technical University. So 10 years ago, we started this research, and she studies the optical properties from the material we are growing. And we have some light coming out from this. And this is an example that when you start collaboration and there's complementary skills and nice personal exchange, you actually create new opportunities. And just to show as an example of that is that Hayan now proposed a project where you actually use silicon carbide for a frequency comb. And here we need to grow the material. And what this does is that you have a laser light coming in, and instead of having like 64 different lasers, if you have one material which actually splits the original light to several lines, then you can have information transmitted using the laser. But instead of having 64, you have fewer, ideally like one. Then you save a lot of energy in this one. But if you have one laser, which is split into different frequencies, if you have several of those, it will be much, much more information. So actually the data which can be transmitted using this type of frequency comb is more than 100 terabit per second. So it's 100 or even 1,000 times more data transmitted than today's. So this became additional avenue of the technology using the silicon carbide, using the experiences we have built up in this collaboration. And it was at this point, 10, 15 years ago, when I became interested how to make usefulness, not only produce the scientific papers, but also to have technology transfer or startup creation. So I started to go to patent courses and some lectures and some other things related to how to make usefulness. And also here, it was not a plan from the beginning, but then a researcher from Pakistan found our papers and he emailed me, contacted me in 2012 at some point, or 11 even, when we had started our first project. And then we sent him some material. So Professor Ashkar made a couple of papers where we started on exchange on that one. So then it became a first activity. And then we had a mobility exchange. So it was supported by the Swedish funding to have mobility travel exchange and so on. And this grew to Professor Ashkar here, to collaborations between Sweden and Pakistan based on new avenues. And this is why it's so good to have complementary things and collaboration with other countries. Like in Sweden, we have some ideas, but we are also limited to some extent for different reasons. But if we partnership with other people who are engaged, devoted, and interested, we will find new opportunities, and then it grows in unexpected ways. And as an example, I met Rizwan Raza. So he was visiting us during 1 year in our research lab, and we had activity and so on. And now, actually, 1 month ago, he initiated to use silicon carbide as direct fuel conversion. So this is also a new research avenue, which was not planned from the beginning, but it became because Rizwan is active with solid oxide fuel cells, so it's using other materials. And I was in the silicon carbide, and when we emerged into collaboration, we started to explore some things, and it became new. So that's why meeting people and having a change is very valuable to create new opportunities. We have our core expertise in the science and the things we're doing, but in order to move ahead and use them in new ways, we need to meet people. So that became an activity where we now try to have a platform exchange between Sweden and Pakistan based on this not planned activity from the beginning, but from the expertise areas, but most of all, the personal engagement, which became a driving force for this. And now we do similar since a few years with Sweden, India on various activities. And if we come back to the material growth which we're doing, so then the thick layers, it was used for the fluorescent silicon carbide for the LED application. And there, when we grow, we have steps which grow, and we actually explore the surface angle of the wafer to control this growth. So it became other surface orientations than we usually use. And in that one, we also came into the cubic silicon carbide. This fluorescent silicon carbide is grown on hexagonal silicon carbide. And when you do the doping, it comes out in the visible region. But then you have cubic silicon carbide, which is actually a silicon carbide type which is more challenging to grow. It's very attractive, but it's challenging to grow. And there we need to have two-dimensional nucleation. So we don't need the steps to do the growth like hexagonal silicon carbide. But first of all, we need the two-dimensional nucleation to form the cubic silicon carbide. And this is where the challenge comes, because it's so many things which are unknown, how to form this and how to form this. So you have large areas of useful material which you can characterize and explore for devices later on. Like I know tomorrow you have an important session on the characterization. And this is very important for understanding the growth. So that is the first step of the new things. And in the cubic silicon carbide, you have usually many small domains, and then you cannot explore the true properties of this material. But with some tricks and research, we can actually have the cubic silicon carbide to form. And once it is grown on off-axis surfaces, you have an on-axis created. And then when it grows, it actually expands laterally using these steps. So this became our approach to have larger size of the cubic silicon carbide and start to control to have decent quality of the material, so we could characterize it in a true way. And here you see some influences like the growth temperature and the degree of off-axis, which should be very low, but not too low and not too large. So with changing of temperature and off-axis, we can actually have cubic silicon carbide, which is the yellow part here, to form so it's dominant. Earlier, it's usually as an inclusion in the material, which was a problem for the hexagonal. But if we reverse the type of growth, we can have actually cubic silicon carbide to be formed so it's dominant over the surface. And my PhD student, Valdas Jokubavicius, made some fantastic things here, how to have single domain of cubic silicon carbide over 7 millimeter size, and then how to expand that so we have few domains over larger size, and so on. So this lateral enlargement is a key factor how to have high quality cubic silicon carbide. And now we can go to the to explore the material properties, but also devices based on this. And then when I was at the Nordic Semiconductor meeting in 2011, I had an invited talk on the fluorescent silicon carbide. And then I met, in the following talk after me, Antonio Marti came and explained about solar cell model using intermediate band. And then explain that if you have a certain band gap and you introduce an intermediate level, if you optimize the numbers here, you can have very efficient absorption of this solar energy. But then you need to have a certain band gap, and this level should be a certain place for this. And when I looked into this presentation, I saw that, cubic silicon carbide fits very nice into this model. And the boron which we used to dope for the fluorescent silicon carbide for a light emission, it has very nice position also. So then, unexpectedly, we came into another research avenue using the cubic silicon carbide, using doping, which we were doing because I was at the conference and heard about this model. So this impurity photovoltaic effect is known, but it's very challenging to get it to work. But if it would work, it would be very efficient type of photovoltaic cells. And also, in fact, this solar-driven energy can be used to split water to produce hydrogen using solar energy only. So my colleague Jan Wosun is exploring this using silicon carbide, the cubic silicon carbide. So I will not go into detail, but it turned out that cubic silicon carbide has very nice properties also for this water splitting to produce hydrogen using solar energy. So that became another application. And in case of growth of silicon carbide, many times we fail with the growth and we test and then we get defects and then we have papers from trying to understand what is happening. And something which happens in the silicon carbide when you heat it up is that you have silicon and carbon bearing species, and we use them to grow. But when we have not optimized conditions, we actually have graphitization of the surface because there's more silicon which leaves, and then you have carbon atoms, and this creates graphitization of the material. So already 20 years ago, we made thin graphitic layers on silicon carbide, and then we made it thinner. So 2005, we had one layer of carbon on silicon carbide. So that was, from growth point of view, very interesting, but we didn't know what to use it for, but it was the graphene. So then in a natural way, we came into the graphene activities. And now we actually combine the graphene with properties from the silicon carbide, for example, for the water splitting, and produce some nice papers based on these things. So the new avenues continue to be new since we have had interactions and collaborations and partnerships with other people, so we get new ideas. It was not the part of the plan from the beginning 20 years ago what to do or which areas to come into. So there are some nice recent papers by Jambo on these things. I will not go into the details, but as you see, they are growing. So if I now go back and look at these things, so from the power devices, which was the original motivation, we came into the fluorescent silicon carbide for LEDs, and we had the cubic silicon carbide for photovoltaic applications and graphene on silicon carbide, and then the frequency comb and hydrogen conversion and direct fuel conversion. And all these things bubble down to innovation. How can we create more innovations from the research findings? So this is an example that we started with some things. It was not a plan from the beginning, but things grew in a natural way. And now to a little bit recap on why are we doing this science? We have the nanoscience, findings, this conference, exchanges, and so on. And here is the basic structure of the blue LED, which was explored from the 70s, 80s. So Professor Akasaki initiated the research around these things. And then you have this material which gave so intense luminescence, but in small areas and so on. But now, after more than 30 years of the research, material development, the device development, and understanding the technology, it has a profound impact in the society by the white LED. So the blue LED with phosphor, which is the white LED, has a tremendous amount of energy saving. But it was not known in the 80s that this would become such technology. So it also grew in its natural way. And if we now look into the white LED usefulness, it's also used like in art and design and so on. So if you have paintings, you can vary the light and the angles, frequencies, and so on, to have a different how you see paintings and so on. So the impression you get can vary depending on the LEDs which are used for purpose. So this is used now in art, but also in buildings. You have a lot of changes. So here is some building in Brussels which changes its color every few seconds, and this could only be possible thanks to the LEDs because they don't consume so much energy. Then you can have many of them and you can design whole cities. So now if we look into the white LED, like funding agencies and so on, they would like to have this technology, but they don't want to wait 30 years for new technologies. They want it in less than 10 years. So then they are requested. So this is Professor Amano, one of the Nobel Prize winners, together with Professor Akasaki for the blue LED. When they have new programs, they actually encourage students, those who want to become entrepreneurs, they can become entrepreneurs. And when you have students who want to deploy production to have the reproducible results, then you can use those, encourage those students for these things. And those who would like to explore new technologies, they are also encouraged. And then you have programs with mentors and internships and so on for these programs. So this becomes a part of the academic research to align with making usefulness from the material. And if we also go back to the graphene, in Europe there is now the graphene flagship, which is a big program to go from the research to actually to be used in the society. So that is now a big activity on the nanoscience, from the basic findings to them. So there's a roadmap from 2013 to 2023 on how it will start its big momentum in this way. So this usefulness is a natural aspect of the science we are doing. And one material itself will not produce all solutions. At the end, it has to be different materials and also like combinations of materials. So here is a presentation by one of the Nobel Prize winners on how you combine different 2D materials to make new avenues, because graphene itself cannot make it and the other 2D material cannot make it. But when you combine them, you get new things which are focusing a certain niche. And here is a balance, something which I encourage to think about. When we make a description of a project, like with work packages, work package 1, work package 2, work package 3, and work package 4, it goes from material to characterization, to device, to some type of prototype. So this is the general scheme. So we can motivate this from technology point of view that this is good to do, and this we are very used to. But if you actually look into this, then these work packages, they form partnerships and value chains. And if you look into what is happening, how the regions will grow, then they say that have many actors in one field, that is an area of strength, and there will also be value chains created. So both from the regional motivation point of view to make economic growth, it aligns with the technology. But there is not so much interaction between the technology and regional. But if we can describe these things, it becomes actually a real motivation. Like today, we have the Agenda 2030 goals, and we are requested to motivate by them. But they are so broad, so we cannot show what is the first step. How do we have a plan to actually come to usefulness? So this is why these regional things are useful. We don't need to understand them everything in detail, but we should be aware of them. And over time, there will be collaborations and different exchange and value change, and there will be collaborations between regions. And now in the next phase, the regional activities go together, so it becomes transnational, and over time it will also be international. So all these things are common for us, but we have them at each different location. And if we go now back to what is our motivation for the science and what is our goal and what do we want to score, then it's always our personal engagement is the first thing. That we want to do these things, we want to explore this science and so on. So that makes us experts in some avenue. But once we have this expertise, we can grow into different avenues. So we need to have this basic competence to actually go to the next level. So making PhD and things like that is a key activity, and making the scientific papers, we need to do that in order to actually come to usefulness. We cannot just do it directly without these years of building up experience. So that's why we are immediately back to this. It will take many years to actually come to some certain stage. And here I want to emphasize that there is collaboration and personal exchange, which is the most important. And I just read about the first Apple computers. When they build up the teams there, they actually focus more on the personal engagement than that they actually had relevant education for something. So into these computers, the first ones, you actually have signatures from all the members in the team inside these first Apple computers. And now you're using these ones for you have the smartphones and the laptops and all these things which have been growing. But it was possible thanks to the teams working together. This is the core activity. So it's not necessary to be the super expert in something or like a big established professor. Teams can find their ways in natural ways. So having the discussion in the lab and about different things and having the personal relations is very important, both in the profession. And this is my first conference in 1996 when I was very young. This was in Greece. But that's where I started to have exchanges from conferences. So we have presentations, which are good. But most important for me is that after the presentation, our coffee breaks or using the lab visits, when we see something, then we interact together in different ways and we understand more from other points of view than the actual presentations. So I want to emphasize to use this time in between presentations to also create opportunities. And it's not only lab visits and so on, it's also the coffee breaks and so on. When you meet someone, if you are at the table, if you start to discuss, maybe you will find out that you have some common interest, but you just didn't know this from the beginning. But since you started to discuss over the coffee and discussing a little bit, you actually came into this exchange, and then you come from different avenues and meet in unexpected ways. And meeting in unexpected ways creates new things. And also this is how I met Nasser Ali, so who was in the introduction for the conference. He has the Nanosmart Conferences and exchange. So that has been building up. And there I met other researchers. So this is very nice to take part of those and maybe even actually propose some workshops or symposiums or sessions in relation to the big ones to be active. Because when you're an organizer of something, like in your area, then you get contacted by other people in unexpected ways. And then you have exchange related to maybe this session, but then you start to talk and then you build your network. And when you build your network, you will be part of project applications, and this is a way to get funding. And this is what we are doing also with Sweden. And Sweden is a little bit unique because researchers in Sweden personally own their inventions. So if we would like to make usefulness, we can personally decide what we will do. Like if we want a partnership with some group in India or make a startup in India which explores some of the research findings we're making, we can personally decide this, which means that it's very easy to decide. The tricky thing is to have funding. But this is a part of the uniqueness of Sweden. The universities do not own the IP which is created in the project. It's the people. So that's an opportunity for how to make more usefulness by the collaboration with different countries. That's why I'm talking about the Sweden, India, because there are so many different things, which means that we can make something new, which other people are not doing. And this is also why I created this JMS Center for Research Utilization. It is to create exchange. We learn from each other. We get ideas. Some of the ideas can be used for our case, some cannot. But then we find some ways to move ahead. There will be no recipes how to do these things, but once we do something, opportunities will happen. And if I come back to this question of the 20-year-old self, when I was 20-year-old, what would I recommend to myself? The replies which were in common here is that the focus is on creating action, experiment things, and start a course so you actually move, because then you can change. But if you try to plan, things will change anyway. And if you try to plan, have rigid goals, maybe you don't see this opportunity. Because in many cases, when you have an innovation from the research and so on, you think that this is the application, like power devices in my case, but it became LEDs. So if we are more flexible in our thinking and activities, we can target something, and then we find out it is this thing which became usefulness, and this created an opportunity, not the other things around it. It was this particular part. So that's why it's good to start with things and try to make best possible plan, but then move ahead. So with this, I would like to, when we address the future and what is the sustainable approach to contribute and actually maybe save the planet, because we have now climate crisis and so on, this entrepreneurial research or thinking about this or partnership in it is an opportunity, both as a career, but also to actually create some usefulness from the activities we are doing. So with this, I thank you all for listening to me. So I did not go into the deep scientific issues of these things. It could be interesting, but I wanted to give a flavor of opportunities which can be created by networking and having activities and this type of exchange. So that's why I also now leave 15 minutes. I should maybe leave more for question and answers, and if you have ideas and so on. So please ask them.